You've managed billions of dollars of spend.
A channel where we're driving six figures every month. Brand that is scalable in 2024 and beyond.
Insights into the innovations and revolutions of the marketing world. Welcome to the Marketing Scientist Podcast.
Hey everyone, we have a really special guest today on the podcast, David Herman, one of the biggest media buyers on the planet today. He's bought billions of dollars in advertising across Meta, Twitter, TikTok, Snap, Pinterest, Google, you name it. One of the most insightful conversations for me personally. We talked about how the industry is evolving, the role of community, the role of AI, and everything there is to know about creative diversity. David, welcome to the podcast. I have waited and waited for this one. It's going to be special. So I'm super excited. I found you a couple of years ago, I think on Twitter, and I've just followed you, stalked you, whatever you want to call it. Do we still call it Twitter or is it X? It's X.
Still Twitter. It'll now change.
I want to start at the very beginning. You've been at the media buying, the marketing, the advertising game for like a decade and a half or maybe even 2 decades. How did you get into this? Was that by design? Did you study it? Was it accidental? And what keeps you going after like 10 years of doing your own thing? Like, I feel like you have learned everything, you've done everything. So tell me a little bit about the starting point and also like what keeps you motivated to keep going.
Yeah. So I got started by accident. I went to school, college in the early 2000s, right when kind of the social media web 2.0 was starting to take off. And I wanted to work in the music industry. It was, living in Los Angeles, it was the cool thing. And, I got family in the music industry. So I was like, okay, they seem like they have really cool jobs. I'm going to go do that. Well, going to school in, 2003, 2004, 2005, when Apple created, the iPod was starting to come out and the illegal music was starting to die off. So I felt like, okay, like we're moving into a new generation. Well, then, I was knee deep in it doing promotions and got involved with marketing then. But it really wasn't anything other than like you were sending out, flyers and direct mail and you were doing very much like grassroots. And in 2004, 2005, MySpace became a thing. And I started getting involved in the direct messaging people on MySpace and kind of doing that. For bands. And that was kind of the start of it was then. Obviously that was very early days. And then I went and worked with a group that we used to film concerts and throw them up on QuickTime video up on the website pre-YouTube. And we did that kind of thing with record labels. So I've kind of been like in that sort of game since then. But really like the whole digital marketing experience, so to speak, kind of took off during the little after the 2008 recession. I was working, I got out of the music industry because I got laid off 3 times in a span of like 2 years. I was like, I can't do this. And I went and worked at an international toy company, in Torrance, California, where I live. Basically, I was the quote unquote marketing manager, like the lowest in the totem pole because I graduated 2 years prior. I had no experience. And they fired everybody but me and like the CMO. Because like, recession, everything going on. Like, well, he's the cheapest and yeah, he can figure it out. Well, I had no clue what insertion orders were. I had no clue. I didn't go to school for that. I went to school for music and film. And so essentially, I learned on the fly how to do digital marketing because 2009 into 2010, Facebook created, their Facebook pages. They started doing ads and then Pinterest was doing ads. And so I was like, this is all really cool. Let's get involved. And so for this toy company, I was basically just given a couple $100 budget, really, like that was it. And I was like, hey, I have to go figure this out. So I was building, bloggers. I was doing Facebook groups. I was doing all that stuff. And then 2012, I went on my own, and kind of I've dabbled, working for others in the time frame, but pretty much have always kind of been doing things on my own since about 2012, 2013, on the e-commerce side. So I've been involved on e-commerce pretty much consistently now full time since about 2012, and working in direct to consumer. And so that's kind of been where I've been at. in terms of like what excites me and why I never get bored, honestly, I think it's a combination of I work with really fun brands that always have interesting challenges. Like, if it's not trying to diagnose a problem with conversion rate, it's a creative problem. If it's not a creative problem, is it a product offering? It's like you're always dealing with some problem. It's never like, hey, everything's golden, let's just go chill. Like that doesn't ever seem to happen in our space. So you're always on your toes, so to speak. And I think that's what kind of keeps me going. Being 39 and kind of feeling like I'm a seasoned veteran in this space. So
that's cool. No, that's fantastic. And I love that story because there's a couple of things that are interesting about your background. You studied art and film, and you were in the music business, and you spent a whole bunch of time doing things that don't scale, right? The direct messaging people on MySpace, the flyers, the direct mailers.
Yeah.
How much of that do you think contributes to how you think about media buying now? Or do you think that was a distraction and it didn't really help you in what you do today?
Back then, it was all about building community, and to this day, it's still about building community for brands. And the brands that I all work with pretty much all have that theme in common: is they're very strong community builders, and they have strong repeat purchases. They are able to scale their businesses while also, withstanding some of these CAC increases on these platforms because their community picks them up. And for me, that's been a big kind of stickler with the brands that I say yes to work with, is that. And I think that the era of like 2005 messaging people before every Vans Warped Tour stop is not scalable to the personalization that it once was. Obviously, I'm sure AI is going to make it personal again, but it's still the same dynamic. It's still personal community building, but you're just doing it at scale and doing it through a mix of widgets versus just like hand to keyboard kind of thing.
That's cool that you're talking about community, right? So I've grown up more in the B2B and SaaS and tech world.
Mm-hmm.
And, I've had exposure to the e-commerce because I worked at PayPal, I worked at Magento, so I saw a lot of sort of e-commerce customers. It's interesting that you talk about community because B2B talks about community all the time. And for whatever reason, I hadn't really thought about B2C as also a place where you're talking about community. What does that look like? Give me an example of what a community for an e-commerce company means or feels like, or how does that come to fruition?
I have a brand that I work with that, we have a Facebook group with like well over 200,000 people on it. And, we engage in that. We kind of, but the community kind of takes over, right? It's a community built around the product and around what they can do with the product. And that group is massive, but that's not it. I mean, you launch an email and your retention rate is so insanely high because they build the excitement in the Facebook group. That's where it starts, right? There's subreddit groups that are out there for the brand. It's really like there's so much more than just like, hey, here's this brand and here's a couple ads. Like it's a living force pretty much day in and day out. Like the Facebook group, I go periodically check it, and it's like every day there's like 20 to 30 new posts of people talking about the brand. And that's like engaging every single day. And that's the group that like is our army. Like the second we release a product, they're telling all their friends about it. They don't make anything. It's not like, multi-level marketing or anything. It's just like, they're just excited to share and grow. And, that's it. I think online communities are about, and a Facebook group is the cheapest, easiest way to do it. There's so many ways to do it, but you do need to approach it where people are. And unfortunately, Instagram doesn't really have that component to it. That's really Facebook. And so that's kind of how we've done it. But then in addition to that, it's each social network. Each social network has their own entity and how you want to build it. So for example, the social media manager for this brand, she knows the TikTok audience to a T, and she knows how to engage them. And so like her posts are getting millions of views without any spend behind them. She just knows how to engage the community. And that's what, to me, is a brand that is scalable in 2024 and beyond, because they get where all this stuff has gone. And yeah, Facebook can go away tomorrow. It's not, but it could, and you still have a community because there is still other things still happening, but you have to be approachable in every single place and respond to people in the different ways in which they engage on each social platform. And that I think is a really big thing that most people sort of forget.
I want to pull on this thread a little bit. I think I tweeted a couple of years ago and I said something like, organic is like the best testing ground for paid. And this was like my own way of learning because we were starting our business a couple of years ago and we were playing around with a bunch of organic. I don't want to spend any money on marketing. And a really, influential sort of marketer responded to that and said, that's all BS. You don't need organic. If you have the money and you have the capital, you can just buy the reach. And you're saying something completely opposite. I'm not going to name names. What's your take to that argument of like, if you do have money and if you have great creative, you can buy the reach and you don't really need to waste all that time on organic stuff? What do you think?
Would say that, you're still having to deal with each ad platform's economics, and you're 100% like it's contingent on the daily active users of those platforms. So if your brand is going to be really dependent on if there's an election and people are turned away, right? Like you're not going to you're going to see your CAC basically go up, versus if you have community based as sort of your driving force, you can send an email out or an SMS out or anything and be like, hey, today only we're doing this, and you can get that revenue that you need to sustain your growth. I think that's the brands that have built their brand simply off of a Facebook ad, they live and die by the CAC on Facebook. And you're building your business. You don't really have a business. You just have an advertising business through Facebook. It's not the same thing. And I hate, let me phrase that. I don't hate, but I very much dislike working with brands that have built that way, because it's really stressful as a media buyer to be able to do my job without having any signal to back it up.
Got it.
And you're just dependent on Facebook. And Facebook is machine learning. And machine learning, if you train it the right way, you can also train it the wrong way. Well, I speak about this a lot, that Meta learns based on your behavior, on how you do things. So if you are like, you know what, I'm good with an $80 CAC. Like, I'm not going to try to bring it down. I'm not going to do anything. I'm good. Meta's just going to go, okay, that's what you want. That's what we're going to get you. And like occasionally you'll drop like Black Friday, things like that. But Meta's just going to stick with what you're basically telling it. And I think that you're constantly having to play that game, and that's just stressful. Like every single day, like, oh no, like tragically something happened in the world. My CAC goes up insane. Well, yeah, it's business. Like things happen on a daily basis, but I'm saying like I would rather not be dependent on so many outside circumstances to get things, but have a proven community that at least can drive something for you in the long run.
Love that perspective. Switching gears a little bit. So you talked about ML, you talked about AI a little bit in the first. I don't think we ever have a conversation where those two words don't get thrown around in some capacity. Do you think we're at that point where we can delegate that type of, optimization to the platforms like, ASC and PMAX, and I'm sure like every platform is coming up with their own algorithmic way of doing media buying. Do you leverage that? Do you believe it? Do you feel like we still need human oversight? What's your take?
You're still going to need oversight into some of this stuff. I think the best way of approaching AI is it being sort of your growth assistant, and like your assistant rather than the person driving it, or the thing driving it, I should say. First off, like, using a Chat GPT, Google AI Studio, Perplexity, any of these tools, you have to always give it proper context before you can even run with it, right? Because if you don't give it context, the thing doesn't even know where to go. And with Meta, like, most people will upload what they think are the ads that are going to work based on something, right? Maybe they've done all this research, right? And then Meta says, actually, no, it's not. Well, is it because it's not because Meta doesn't have the proper context for where you're going with this? So I think like you have to approach all this stuff with a level of side-eyeing on it. Like, am I like vetting it? I don't see a world in which AI is going to replace anything and everybody. I just don't. I think it's a growth tool that is going to be used as your lever for advancing your career. So instead of saying, "Hey Meta, go change my creative and all this stuff," I'm going to say, "Hey Meta, I'm looking to drop my CAC by $18. Can you look at this level of data and give me 5 examples of how I can do that?" And then order it in order of importance and where I could start. And right. And then it's going to look at your website. It's going to look at everything, and then it's going to give you answers. Well, then it's my job as the professional to take that data and go, okay, Meta's basically done my research for me. Now I need to, as the person who's actually in charge, go look at that data and go, all right, I think I know where to go next. Then you go back to the AI tool and you go, all right, I'm going to focus on this area first. Can you spit out data for me? And can you give me basic, you're just basically summarizing things, but you're allowing yourself in your brain to still do a lot of the activity, because I think that's these tools miss context.
Right.
And that's where I don't know if they're ever going to get to a point where, I'm sure they'll get to a point where they have context, but I don't know if, like, is the government going to let that happen? Right? Like, there's things where it's like, there's probably going to be a point where we stop as a advancement and be, all right, if we go beyond this, that's when things are going to get really sketchy. I imagine that some point will happen, right? Like, I hope, but
the classic, right? Like the what's that, Murphy's Law, right? Whatever worst thing that you can imagine happens, right? Like
happens, yeah.
Right. So, yeah, okay. But on that point, right? I'm assuming you are using things like PMAX and Advantage Shopping and all that stuff in your data.
Yeah.
Right? Like you're not using it, but you're not yet sort of delegating entirely to it.
Right. Yeah. You're putting an effort into those things. I mean, I've got some brands that they just work great, right? And they're great tools, and we scale with them. But we can't do everything with them because there's still a level of, I think there's a place where they just stop performing like to the level that you want them to at the scale that you're trying to get. And brands I work with, some of these brands spend 6 figures a day on ads. So it's like, I can't entirely rely on that tool, because at some point there is a lot of diminishing returns that happens on those. Where I need to move outside that to other audiences and other things. And it's so funny, like in 2024, to talk about, oh yeah, I use custom audiences. I use lookalikes. I use interest target. And people are like, wait, what? You're like, because at some level, when you've reached a certain point, you're really trying to eke anything you can out of these systems. Because what happens is, if you log it into an AI, into ASC, Meta's just going to keep going down the rabbit hole it's going to go down. Yes, you can scale it, but what we've always found is that, adding an interest target campaign in there, you will see different types of customers in those in terms of like behaviors. Like CVR will be awesome on a certain day versus ASC. And like, there's all of these like weird nuances. Is it right? I don't know, but like it works. So we just kind of go with it. And that's the thing that I always kind of come away with at, all these conferences and all these like courses and all this stuff. Is there is no right way to run any of this stuff. Like, it really is. Every brand that I work with has a different setup within Meta. There's none that are exactly the same, because each brand is responding differently to how these platforms work. And I think that's what the biggest takeaway from media buying now versus say 10 years ago or 5 years ago is that they are so fundamentally different in how things work. I have one brand that I can't launch a video. Like, it just doesn't work. We've tried everything. It just doesn't work. And it's like, we've left it running for months on end, and it's like the CAC is double at everything else on the static. And it's one of those brands where if you shut the ads off, Facebook, like the revenue dies. So it's like, okay, like for this type of a situation, we're just going to go on statics, and we're going to be the best brand with static images, and people respond to it. And I'm like, okay, I have other brands where video is the only thing that works. So it's like, it really is, there is no one way to do anything. So
you had this interesting post, and I bookmarked it. And I'm going to read it out for everybody. we lost the plot of marketing when we got too much data. Now we're drowning in spreadsheets, trying to find a needle in the haystack, when the true success is creating really cool marketing for really cool products and merging the two in a perfect harmony, waiting for some magic to happen. Rarely does that magic happen, but the joy is in the case. Spreadsheets and data are great. Just be aware we're not always making the right decisions because people don't often fit into neat little boxes we try to put them in. And I feel like that quote summarizes what we just talked about. The nuances and all the little breadcrumbs that you give to Meta or to Pinterest or to Google or to YouTube, it's the people behind those screens who are interacting with those breadcrumbs and taking new directions. And so there is no inherent truth, right? Meta doesn't know something that you and I don't know. It's just doing whatever the human behavior is dictating it to do. So it's fascinating story here. Okay, so on that note, you've managed billions of dollars of spend, if I can project. I think
I don't even know.
And
I've made a lot of money.
Lots of money across lots of different platforms, right? So Meta, Reddit, Pinterest, YouTube, everything, CTV.
Yeah.
And you talk a lot about channel diversification. For a brand that's primarily reliant on, let's just say, Facebook and Google, or if you're a B2B, LinkedIn and Google. That's the default, right? That's what happens. How do you advise a client to even start to think about channel diversification? What is a crawl, walk, run that you would offer them?
So the way that I always approach it is, say, for example, all right, if you're spending under $100,000 a month on ads, which is a lot of money for a lot of people, there's no reason to be diversified across 3 or 4 platforms. There's just not. It's like, focus on where your audience is. If it's B2B and LinkedIn's crushing for you, just put all your eggs in that basket and maybe a little bit on Google just to pick up some people, right? If it's a D2C brand and, Facebook, just put it on Facebook. My thought is, in how I like to diversify, is once I feel like I'm in that like $150, $200, $250, $300,000, I'm starting to really kind of get this thing locked in. That's when I like to go, okay, what else is out there for me to add to this? Because the way that I look at it is, whenever you add another channel, there is like, we often see it anyway, there's somewhat of a halo effect where because most everybody is on Meta, at either it be Facebook or Instagram, which is, that's just the reality. And so it's like, okay, like let's try TikTok, right? For example, and like, all right, we're going to lean in on that. What we often see is the retargeting for that types of users end up falling back into Meta. And then what happens is we often see Meta will actually do better targeting because it's getting an outside perspective of traffic coming in. That's what I've often seen in these types of scenarios. Now, I don't like to tell people, hey, go test TikTok today. Well, no, you need a lot of creative. There's lots to do, whether it be Snapchat, Pinterest, whatever it may be. So it's really like there is a threshold that needs to be set before you really are able to really, I guess, spend against that on these other channels. And then it's also looking at like, do you have the creative bandwidth to be able to do 2 channels? If you don't, and you're feeling like, okay, like, yeah, this is, I can only get this far, then you're like, no, don't do it. Another example is a brand I work with that I've spent on Facebook and Google for 3 years. And in basically, we're spending about $350 on Meta and about $100 on Google. Our CAC is the same year over year. Like nothing's really changed. There's no community, nothing like of the sort, but there's a lot of people who buy and repeat. Like people do buy the product and come back and back and back. So this year we decided, you know what? We're hearing a lot of good things about TikTok shops. Let's lean in and try it. Let's get affiliates and let's go. So we paid an agency to kind of help us. And, it is turned into a channel where we're driving 6 figures every month.
Wow.
And is it the most profitable thing in the world? No, it's not. But what's happened as a result is it's allowed us to scale spend on Meta more than we ever have, because the revenue and the halo effect that's coming from TikTok is so real that it's actually increased our search volume and increased the people in the user base. So it's allowing Meta to better identify more people because our data in our search went up. And so we actually act as a break even on TikTok so that we can get scale on Meta. And so that's how we do it. So like, that's how you want to leverage another platform. And like, you know, we're very strict on like our goals over there.
If I can play that back to you, what you're saying is that it might be the same audience. It's the same human being potentially, but because they are interacting with your brand on TikTok Shop, it's somehow increasing their engagement on Facebook with your ads.
Yeah.
So it's lifting sort of all boats up a little bit.
Yes.
Which is fascinating.
Yeah. You're just adding additional exposure to where people are in your target market. And like, and again, I don't want anyone listening to this to go, oh, I'm only on Facebook. I need to go on TikTok Shop, or I need to go on Snapchat. Like, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying there needs to be a threshold that you feel you've hit on Meta. We're like, okay, like we're kind of stuck here. Let's try to at least bring in something else to see if that can allow us to get to the next level. That's kind of how I look at it.
One related question to this, or actually two related questions. One is creative diversity, right? So the same creative that works on Meta is probably not going to work on TikTok, not going to work on YouTube, what have you. And there's a natural bandwidth that your team has. And so I totally get that point, and I think you need to have that creative sort of, you know, execution arm. There are some people who tell me the opposite of that, which is like, hey, once you found a winning message, you don't need to like necessarily iterate on that. Like it just works. Just keep running that message that you have. What's your take on those two arguments?
Yeah. So I find that, you know, creative diversity is a term, and it's a thought that a lot of people are very polarized on. Now in Meta's eyes, Meta is very much in the camp of the more and various creative, the better. I think that when people hear that, they think, oh, I need to have multiple different types of messaging. You don't. You can keep the same message. It's just a matter of how you're creating the content. That means various different types. So it's like a lot of people will just go, all right, I'm going to get 20 creators to talk about my product. Well, believe it or not, in Meta's eyes, they'll often see 20 creator posts with each of them looking at their phone and talking to the camera as one asset. It's one asset type. And that's your one creative. That's going to appeal to a certain kind of clientele. But what about the person that appeals to more, that is really likes to like engage and watch beautiful artistic content? Maybe they don't get served your ad. So how do you serve it to them? That might be you put a little bit extra effort into like the footage that you're getting, the feel, the pacing. And that's really what you mean by creative diversity. It's the various elements of a piece of content and how you serve it. So whenever I launch ads and I scale ads, I always like to give the system multiple asset types. So it's a static, a carousel, a GIF, short video, medium, long video, you know, all these different types of assets, so that you're able to allow the algo to be able to find a user based on all this creative that you've given it, to identify that user and go, okay, this person engages with this. We're going to go after them in the auction, and actually we're going to win that auction because we're hitting them in the right moment, right? And so that's how you have to think about it. And like, I'm constantly preaching to every creative team I work with. It's like more diversity, more diversity, more diversity. And it's like, I think it does get kind of glossed over on what that actually means.
And how often do you recommend that people refresh their creative? This is another point, right? Which is, are you doing this on a monthly basis, a quarterly basis, an annual basis? There's no rules. Like
there's no rule to it, in my opinion. You know, I've got brands that we are getting so many net new assets a week that they're so materially different already, because we have different agencies pulling creative for us, that it's really easy. I've got other companies I work with that I get the same style assets every week, and I'm fighting to get them to think differently about this. And, you know, it's always a back and forth. I think that you just have to start with something. Like, if you're only doing statics, let's try some like 5 to 8 second videos iterating on those static ads. So for example, say you have a hero ad, a static ad that's spent so much money against it. Literally take that ad, throw it into like a CapCut or Instagram Reels, do a green screen video over that ad, literally pointing to the ad in the graphic behind you and talking about it. That's a creative diversity. You're taking the same element and you're putting it on its head to appeal to somebody who normally engages with Instagram Reels content, right? They're not going to look at a static ad on Instagram Reels. They're going to look at a video because that's how they engage with the platform. So I think that's how you have to be thinking about things, is like each user is engaging with social in a very different way. And also different age groups engage with these tools in certain ways. So it's like, how do you want to engage them? And how is that asset type going to engage them? And then what's the age demo that you're going after?
Very cool. Okay, I'm gonna, in the last section here, talk about my favorite topic, which is measurement. Probably your least favorite topic. I don't know, maybe. But after having done this for a decade, after having seen all the changes from the 2010s, when everything was a lot more, let's just say, loosey-goosey in terms of all the privacy stuff, you could get access to pretty much any data point that you wanted to. And the last 5 years, where that's completely changed and it's much harder to do the deterministic type of stuff. What is your recommendation for any brand that's setting up measurement? What's the perfect stack from your perspective?
Oh man. I use house incrementality quite a bit. I really like them. But I think it's overkill if you're barely spending money, because it can be kind of pricey. Incrementality tools in general, to me, are more valuable than like mixed media modeling for brands, because I think it gives me better direction to where to go. I think with MMM and those types of tools, measurement becomes really kind of confusing, because like, okay, it's spitting out this result, but what do I do with that? Like, do I increase spend? Do I double down here? And I think that MMM is something where you're looking at it at the beginning of the year, and maybe you're having touch points throughout the year where you're like looking at it again and making decisions in that way. But incrementality is something where it's like, hey, I've got, I know Meta is this, I know Pinterest is this, I know Snap is this, I know TikTok is this. And you're every once in a while you're going back and you're checking. Maybe once a quarter you're going and be like, okay, is it still holding? Is it still holding? Is it still holding? And it gives you a better understanding of how each platform and the unreported numbers actually look, right? So it's like, if, I have a brand that, we drive 48% of our customer base through Meta, and it's verified. Like, it's 48% pretty much consistently, right? So we know, like, hey, let's dedicate 50% of our budget every single month to Meta, because it's driving almost 50% of our new customers. Can I scale that? Actually, no. Like, I've reached the mecca for the level of spend that I'm at before our CAC will start to increase exponentially as a result. Can we be okay with that? Are we good with that? And then that's when those conversations kind of come in. That's what I think incrementality is really good at, that I think like a MMM or MTA don't do as well. I still use MTA tools, attribution tools. Obviously, Northbeam as a person who kind of helped originally build and has been a part of that company for a while now. I always look at it and say, I don't ever want to like come out and be biased one way or the other. I think MTA has a purpose, and it works as a directional play. I don't think anything should be taken as gospel on any of this stuff, because it's all there's always probabilistic things that are happening and all that stuff. But that's kind of how I look at it. But what's the funniest part is, if you ask me this on like a Tuesday, you'll see me probably spending more time looking at Last Click and Shopify than anything else, because I'm just like, okay, day over day, how are things trending? And if there's an issue where, Meta had an outage yesterday, what was the impact on Last Click? Because that's really where I care. Like, do I need to shift things because, this happened or this happened? So it's kind of a non-answer, but I think it's a muddied answer, if that makes sense.
No, it's good. It's good. I like this. And you mentioned a couple of our potential competitors, which is awesome. Hopefully this will come across as super unbiased. So Herrmann, we do measurement, right? So we do marketing mix modeling, we do incrementality testing, both. And I think your point of view is exactly right, that MMMs are helpful in understanding the past, but not necessarily helping you take action for the future. And incrementality testing is the gold standard when it comes to taking action with a different strategy, right? What is your hypothesis? What is your learning agenda? And then how do you act upon it? I think the problem that I have with the word or the phrase MTA is, to me, it's more behavioral analytics. It's more analytics than attribution, right?
Yeah.
And so when you look at day over day, hey, Meta had an outage and I want to see the impact of that, you're looking at, okay, the number of people who are clicking through directly from Meta, how much did they drop by? And therefore, how much do I have to make up for it, right? And that's a very different type of a problem. It's not really an attribution problem. It's more like observability, right? So you're trying to make sure everything is working as designed, as opposed to something broke in the buying process. Very cool. Okay, last question for you. If there's a in-house, VP of marketing, head of marketing, whether it's a B2C or a B2B brand, and they're thinking about 2025 planning in terms of brand versus performance, right? The classic question and debate. What are some thoughts that you would give to that in-house marketer thinking about this brand versus performance sort of question?
I would say that brand equals performance, and that one you measure on a day-to-day basis, and one you measure in months to quarters or even a year. And how I mean that is, none of these tools are going to give you, like, I'm talking about like just an attribution like Meta and stuff. They're not going to tell you that your top of funnel is working. They're not. They can't do it. So you have one outcome, and that's looking at, yes, you can throw some incrementality in there and things like that, which I would probably recommend doing for the brands that have the level of spend. For the smaller brands, I like to just go share a voice. Like, is my organic reaching? Is my organic increasing? Are we seeing people coming to the site more as a result? Is my post-purchase survey data saying word of mouth is going up? Because ultimately, that's where you're going to see the result. I'm on record everywhere saying I love branded content and I love running branded content. I've got one brand that, we launch net new top of funnel ads, and we scale them hard. And like throughout November, like we increase in spend every day, because we're just looking at reach. Like, can I get more reach? And I think that that's how people should be thinking about it in their own way. Most people will just take a direct response ad and throw that in top of funnel. No, I actually think that's a bad idea. I think you need to approach them very differently. Storytelling and humor, or invoking some type of an emotion, is the outcome you're trying to go for, and drive it that way. Because if you can invoke an emotion with your ad, then people are most likely to remember it, right? Like I don't know if you saw, there's this Geico commercial that runs every Halloween. It's this group of, they look like high schoolers are running through this place. Like, why don't we go in the broken barn? And then there's like the guy that's trying to take them out. He's standing right behind him. That ad has been running for like 9 years, and they just turn it back on every year because they found that ad, people remember it so much so that there's no reason for them to make a new ad. And that's how I think, I'm like, that is so brilliant. They've identified a Halloween ad that resonates so well with a customer base that they just turn it back on and save all that money on new creative. That's how you think about things. And it's like, they have the research to do it, and the research for a smaller brand is so different. So, yeah. So anyway, that's how I think about it.
Brand equals performance. I love it. What a great note to end this on. Thank you, David. And we'll do this again maybe in a few months.
Sure. Always happy to talk.
Well, there you go, folks. That was David Herman, CEO of Herman Digital, and I highly recommend you give him a follow on Twitter or on LinkedIn. We'll have many more fun and insightful conversations next week, so tune in again. See you then.